The dust swept across the arid plains of Wyoming Territory like a veil of time itself, obscuring the small figure of Gabriella Townsend as she stared at the charred remains of what had once been her home. 1875 had already taken everything from her husband, her trust, and now the last physical reminder of a life she'd once believed in. Gabriella's fingers tightened around the lone photograph she'd managed to salvage, her wedding portrait. In it, she was smiling, naive to the betrayal that would come. Charles had been handsome and charming, promising her the world when they married 3 years ago. What he'd delivered instead was heartache, gambling debts, and finally abandonment, leaving her to face the vengeful men he'd swindled. "Miss Townsend?" Sheriff Mills approached cautiously, his weathered face a mask of practiced sympathy. "I'm sorry about your home. We suspect it was the Murphy boys. Seems your husband owed them quite a sum before he passed." Gabriella didn't correct him about Charles's passing. Let the town believe he'd died honorably rather than run off with a saloon girl, leaving his wife to face his creditors. The shame of the truth was hers alone to bear. "What will you do now?" the sheriff asked. She squared her shoulders. At 23, she was too young to feel this hollow. "I'll take the stage to Sweetwater tomorrow. My aunt had a small boarding house there. She passed last winter, and I'm her only kin. It's all I have left." The sheriff nodded. "Sweetwater's growing. The railroad's bringing more folks west every day. You might find a fresh start there." A fresh start. Gabriella almost laughed. What she wanted wasn't a fresh start, but a safe harbor, a place where she could build walls around her heart so thick that no man could breach them again. The journey to Sweetwater took 2 days by stagecoach, each mile putting welcome distance between Gabriella and the ashes of her former life. The coach rattled and swayed, carrying her along with 4 other passengers, a businessman, an elderly couple, and a young mother with a sleeping infant. Gabriella kept to herself, answering direct questions with polite brevity, her gaze fixed on the changing landscape. The Wyoming Territory spread before her, vast and unforgiving, yet somehow beautiful in its wildness. Perhaps she could learn to be like this land, resilient, self-sufficient, needing no one. When the stagecoach finally rolled into Sweetwater, Gabriella's first impression was of dust and noise. The town was indeed growing, with construction visible on several new buildings. The railroad station bustled with activity, and the main street teemed with merchants, cowboys, and settlers going about their business. The driver helped her down, handing her the single trunk containing all her worldly possessions. "Sweetwater Hotel is that way, madam, if you're needing accommodations." "Thank you, but I'll be staying at the Willow Creek boarding house. It belonged to my aunt, Martha Finch." Recognition lit his eyes. "Miss Martha's place?" "Good woman, she was. It's 3 blocks down. Corner of Pine and Front Street." Gabriella hired a boy with a wagon to transport her trunk and followed him through the busy streets. Sweetwater was larger than her previous town, with more businesses and more strangers, which suited her fine. Anonymity was a comfort. The Willow Creek boarding house stood 3 stories tall, a bit weathered but sturdy, with a wide front porch and green shutters. It looked exactly as her aunt had described in her letters. Gabriella paid the boy and climbed the steps, using the key she'd been sent after her aunt's death. The interior was dim and quiet. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams streaming through the windows. The furniture was covered with sheets, preserved as if waiting for Martha's return. Gabriella set down her trunk and moved through the rooms, pulling off sheets and opening windows to air out the staleness. The boarding house had 8 guest rooms, a comfortable parlor, a kitchen, and a small private apartment at the back, where her aunt had lived. It was clean, but clearly had been vacant for months. A knock at the door startled her. Gabriella composed herself before answering, finding a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands standing on the porch. I'm Eleanor Simmons from next door. I saw someone had finally arrived at Martha's place. You must be her niece she spoke so fondly of. Yes, Gabriella Townsend. Thank you for checking in. Eleanor smiled warmly. Martha was a dear friend. When she passed, we all wondered what would become of this place. It's good to see family taking it over. Do you plan to reopen the boarding house? Gabriella hadn't considered any other option. Yes, I suppose I do. Wonderful. Sweetwater needs good lodgings with all the new folks coming in. The railroads brought prosperity, and the cattle business is booming. If you need any help getting settled, I'm just next door. After Eleanor left, Gabriella stood in the middle of the parlor, overwhelmed by the task ahead but grateful for it. Work would keep her thoughts occupied, her heart safely disengaged. Over the next week, Gabriella threw herself into cleaning and restoring the boarding house. She hired 2 local girls to help with the heavier work and laundering, and gradually, Willow Creek came back to life. She placed an advertisement in the local newspaper and put out a sign: clean rooms, fair prices, respectable lodgings. Her first boarders arrived within days: a schoolteacher, a clerk from the mercantile, and an elderly gentleman who worked as the town's bookkeeper. Quiet, respectable people who paid on time and kept to themselves. Just what she wanted. Gabriella established a routine. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for her boarders, spent mornings cleaning and doing accounts, afternoons baking and preparing evening meals, and evenings in her small sitting room with a book. It was a solitary life, but a purposeful one. The emptiness inside her remained, but she grew adept at ignoring it. As summer turned to autumn, Sweetwater continued to grow. New businesses opened, and the cattle drives brought cowboys to town with pockets full of pay. Gabriella kept her boarding house strictly respectable, turning away rowdy cowboys and maintaining a reputation for propriety and good meals. Eleanor became a friend, stopping by with baked goods or to share town gossip. Through her, Gabriella learned about the local families, the politics, and the hierarchies of Sweetwater society. You should come to church this Sunday, Eleanor urged one afternoon as they sat on the porch shelling peas. Reverend Parker gives a fine sermon and you'd meet more folks. Gabriella hesitated. She'd avoided social gatherings, preferring the safety of her walls. Perhaps. I'm quite busy with the boarding house. Busy is one thing, isolated is another, Eleanor said gently. Martha wouldn't want you locking yourself away. Guilt nudged Gabriella. Her aunt had been a social, generous woman. I'll consider it. True to her word, that Sunday found Gabriella in her best dress, a deep blue that matched her eyes, sitting beside Eleanor in the small white church. She endured the curious stares and polite introductions, maintaining her pleasant but reserved demeanor. She had no interest in becoming a subject of interest, particularly to the single men of Sweetwater. As the congregation dispersed after the service, Eleanor introduced her to the Parkers, the Millers, the Hendersons, a blur of names and faces that Gabriella knew she would struggle to recall. She was turning to leave when a commotion drew everyone's attention. 3 men on horseback thundered down the main street, whooping and firing pistols into the air. Townspeople scattered, women gathering children and men stepping protectively in front of their families. Rawlins boys, someone muttered, back from the cattle drive with money to burn? Gabriella watched with disapproval as the young men dismounted outside the saloon, still laughing at the disruption they'd caused. One of them, tall and dark-haired, caught her eye and had the audacity to tip his hat with a grin. She turned away, disgusted. Don't mind them, Eleanor sighed. Young cowboys letting off steam. They'll settle down after a few days in town. Menaces is what they are, Gabriella replied, more sharply than she intended. Someone could have been hurt. On the walk home, she couldn't shake her irritation. Men like that, reckless, irresponsible, reminded her too much of Charles. All charm on the surface, nothing of substance beneath. The following morning, Gabriella was at the mercantile purchasing supplies when the bell above the door jingled. She turned to see one of yesterday's troublemakers entering the one who had tipped his hat to her. Up close, he was younger than she'd thought, perhaps 25, with dark hair and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, which he did now upon seeing her. "Morning, madam," he said, removing his hat. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Gabriella gave him a cold nod and turned back to her list. To her annoyance, he moved to stand beside her at the counter. "I believe I saw you outside the church yesterday. I'm Vincent Rawlins, but everyone calls me Vince." "Mr. Rawlins," she replied stiffly, not offering her own name. He seemed undeterred by her coolness. "You must be new to Sweetwater. I'd remember a face like yours." "Miss Townsend," Mr. Coleman, the shopkeeper, called. "I've got those linens you ordered from back east. Fine quality, just as you requested." "Thank you," Gabriella said, grateful for the interruption. "Please add them to my order." "You're Miss Townsend?" Vincent asked. "The lady who reopened the Willow Creek boarding house?" She sighed, resigning herself to conversation. "Yes. Gabriella Townsend. My Uncle Hank speaks highly of your establishment, says you serve the best breakfast in Wyoming Territory." Gabriella remembered her elderly bookkeeper boarder. "Mr. Henry Rawlins is your uncle?" "Yes, madam. He's been staying at your place while sorting out the accounts for our ranch. The Bar R is about 15 miles outside town." This connection to her respectable boarder made it harder to dismiss him outright, but Gabriella maintained her reserve. "Your uncle is a gentleman, a quality that seems to vary within families." His smile faltered slightly. "If you're referring to our entrance yesterday, I apologize. Joe and Tom get carried away sometimes. Won't happen again." "I should hope not. Someone could have been injured by such recklessness." Vincent studied her, his expression turning thoughtful. "You're absolutely right, Miss Townsend. It was foolish and dangerous. I'm genuinely sorry." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. She'd expected defensive bluster, not a straightforward apology. Before she could respond, Mr. Coleman returned with her order. "That'll be $4.35, Miss Townsend." Gabriella opened her reticule, counting out the money. As she gathered her purchases, Vincent stepped forward. "May I help you carry these back to your boarding house? Seems like a heavy load for one person." "No, thank you. I manage quite well on my own." She nodded a goodbye and left, feeling his eyes on her back as she walked away. Over the next few days, Gabriella found herself encountering Vincent Rawlins with surprising frequency. He appeared at the post office while she was collecting mail, offered to help when she was struggling with a delivery of firewood, and even attended the following Sunday's church service, sitting 2 rows behind her and greeting her politely afterward. "I believe you're following me, Mr. Rawlins," she finally said when he appeared at the bakery while she was purchasing bread. He laughed, a warm sound that she refused to find appealing. "Sweetwater's a small town, Miss Townsend. Hard not to cross paths. Odd that we never did until recently. I've been away on a cattle drive for 3 months. Just got back last week." He paid for his own purchases a cherry pie and held the door for her as they left. "Besides, I like to check in on Uncle Hank regularly. Your uncle is perfectly comfortable at my boarding house. I don't doubt it. But family's family." He fell into step beside her as she walked back toward Willow Creek. "May I walk with you? These streets can get rough with the cattle buyers in town." The main street was indeed busy with cowboys and cattle buyers, the fall season bringing commerce and chaos in equal measure. Gabriella reluctantly nodded her assent. "I heard you came from up north," Vincent said conversationally. "What brought you to Sweetwater?" "My aunt left me the boarding house." "That's the practical reason. I wondered about the personal one." Gabriella glanced at him sharply. "There isn't one. The boarding house needed running and I needed somewhere to live. Simple as that." Vincent didn't push. but his perceptive gaze made her uncomfortable. They walked in silence for a moment before he spoke again. "We're having a harvest dance at the ranch this Saturday. The whole town's invited. Good food, music, decent company. You should come." "I don't dance, Mr. Rawlins." "Everyone dances, Miss Townsend. Some just need reminding how." They had reached the boarding house steps. Vincent handed her the bread she'd purchased. "Think about it. Eleanor Simmons can show you the way if you decide to come." Before she could formulate another refusal, he tipped his hat and was gone, whistling as he walked away. That evening, as Gabriella served dinner to her boarders, Mr. Henry Rawlins mentioned the upcoming dance. "You should attend, Miss Townsend. The Bar R puts on a fine spread, and it's a good way to meet the better sort of folks in the county." "I'm not much for social gatherings, Mr. Rawlins." The elderly man's eyes twinkled. "My nephew mentioned he invited you. Vince is a good boy. Bit wild in his younger days, but he's settled down since taking over ranch operations from his father." Gabriella made a non-committal noise and continued serving. Later, as she was clearing dishes, Eleanor stopped by with a basket of preserves. "Are you going to the Rawlins harvest dance?" her friend asked immediately. "I hadn't planned to." Eleanor clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Gabriella Townsend, you've been in Sweetwater for nearly 3 months and hardly set foot outside this boarding house except for church and errands. It's not healthy." "I'm perfectly content with my life as it is." "Are you? Because from where I'm standing, you look like a woman hiding." The words stung with their accuracy. Gabriella busied herself with the dishes, avoiding Eleanor's gaze. "What are you afraid of?" Eleanor asked more gently. "I'm not afraid, I'm practical. I have a business to run. The boarding house won't collapse if you take one evening off." Eleanor placed a hand on her arm. Martha loved those harvest dances. She never missed one. It was a low blow, invoking her aunt, and both women knew it. Gabriella sighed. "I don't even have a suitable dress." Eleanor's face brightened. "Oh, I can help with that. My Sarah left behind several lovely gowns when she married and moved to Denver. You're about her size." Which was how, despite her better judgment, Gabriella found herself in a borrowed green silk dress the following Saturday evening, riding in Eleanor's buggy toward the Bar R Ranch. The dress was slightly too tight in the bodice and a touch too short, but Eleanor had made quick alterations that rendered it presentable. "You look beautiful," Eleanor assured her for the third time. "That color brings out the gold in your hair." Gabriella smoothed her skirts nervously. It had been years since she'd attended a social event without Charles, and even longer since she'd gone to one without a hollow pit of dread in her stomach, wondering what trouble he would cause before the night was through. The Bar R ranch house came into view as they crested a hill, a large 2-story structure with light spilling from every window. Lanterns hung from trees in the yard, and a large barn had been cleared for dancing. Wagons and buggies were already parked in neat rows, and the sound of fiddle music drifted through the evening air. "Quite the affair," Gabriella murmured as they pulled up. "The Rawlins family does everything with style," Eleanor replied. "They're the largest landowners in the county, and good people besides. Old Mr. Rawlins passed last year, and Vincent's been running things since. Done a fine job too, by all accounts." A ranch hand helped them down from the buggy and directed them toward the house. Gabriella followed Eleanor, her steps hesitant. She felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't in months. The walls she'd carefully constructed around her heart seemed suddenly thin. The ranch house was warm and crowded with guests, women in their finest dresses and men in clean shirts and string ties mingled in the large front room. Eleanor immediately began introducing Gabriella to people she hadn't met at church, and she found herself smiling and nodding automatically, barely registering names. "Miss Townsend?" The deep voice came from behind her. Gabriella turned to find Vincent Rawlins looking down at her, his expression one of pleased surprise. He looked different in his evening clothes, a dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. "Mr. Rawlins, thank you for the invitation. I'm glad you came." His eyes traveled briefly over her dress before returning to her face. "Green suits you." Before she could respond, an older woman appeared at his side. "Vincent, aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" "Of course. Mother, this is Miss Gabriella Townsend, who runs the Willow Creek boarding house where Uncle Hank stays. Miss Townsend, my mother, Margaret Rawlins." Mrs. Rawlins was a handsome woman in her 50s, with Vincent's dark eyes and a welcoming smile. "Miss Townsend, I've heard so much about you from Hank, and more recently from my son." Her knowing glance at Vincent made Gabriella uncomfortable. "All good things, I hope," she replied politely. "Indeed. Hank says your biscuits are better than my cook's, which is high praise indeed." Mrs. Rawlins took her arm. "Come, let me introduce you to some of our neighbors. Vincent, make yourself useful and fetch Miss Townsend some punch." For the next hour, Gabriella was swept into the social whirl of the evening. Mrs. Rawlins introduced her to what seemed like every rancher, merchant, and notable person in the county. She was invited to join the Ladies' Aid Society, asked to contribute to the new school building fund, and questioned extensively about her boarding house. Throughout it all, Vincent Rawlins remained a constant presence, appearing at her elbow with refreshments, steering her away from the more tedious conversationalists, and making her laugh despite herself with wry observations about the guests. "Mrs. Hollister has been trying to marry off her daughter to any man with property for 3 seasons," he murmured as they watched a determined-looking woman push a young girl toward a balding rancher. "Perhaps she should let her daughter choose for herself," Gabriella replied. "A radical notion around these parts." His eyes held hers for a moment longer than was comfortable. "Some folks still believe marriages should be arranged for advantage." "And what do you believe, Mr. Rawlins?" "I believe a person's heart is the only compass worth following." He smiled slightly. "Even if it sometimes leads you into trouble." The fiddle music grew louder as more people moved toward the barn for dancing. Vincent extended his hand. "Would you honor me with a dance, Miss Townsend?" Every instinct told her to refuse, to maintain the safe distance she'd established. But something in his steady gaze made her place her hand in his. "One dance, Mr. Rawlins." The barn had been transformed with lanterns and autumn decorations, dried corn stalks and pumpkins arranged artfully around the edges, fresh straw spread on the floor for dancing. The musicians played a lively reel, and couples were already whirling around the makeshift dance floor. Vincent led her into the dance with confidence, his hand warm at her waist. Gabriella found herself remembering steps she thought she'd forgotten, moving in rhythm with him as they joined the circle of dancers. "You said you didn't dance," he said as they came together in the pattern. "I said I don't. Not that I can't." His laugh was genuine. A critical distinction. The music quickened, and conversation became impossible as they separated and rejoined, turned with other partners, and finally returned to each other. Gabriella was surprised to find herself enjoying the movement, the music, even the warmth of Vincent's hand when it clasped hers. When the dance ended, she was flushed and slightly breathless. Vincent looked down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Another?" he asked as the musicians struck up a waltz. She should say no. One dance was what she'd promised, but the music was sweet, and for the first time in years, she felt something other than emptiness or pain. Very well. This dance was slower, more intimate. Vincent's hand at her waist guided her gently around the floor, and she was acutely aware of his closeness, the scent of soap and leather that clung to him, the sure way he moved. "You're a fine dancer, Miss Townsend." "My father insisted I learn. He believed it was an essential skill for a lady." "Wise man. Is he still living?" She shook her head. He passed 5 years ago. My mother when I was a child. I'm sorry. My father died last year, thrown from a horse. A shadow crossed his face. It's a hard thing, losing parents. The simple understanding in his voice touched her. Yes, it is. They danced in silence for a moment, the music weaving around them. Then Vincent spoke again, his voice lower. I've been wanting to ask, are you running from something, Miss Townsend? Or someone? Gabriella stiffened in his arms. That's a very personal question, Mr. Rawlins. I apologize if I overstepped. His eyes held genuine concern. It's just you keep everyone at such a distance. Even when you smile, there's a wariness in your eyes. The waltz ended before she had to respond. Gabriella stepped back, suddenly needing air, space away from his perceptiveness. I should find Eleanor. Excuse me. She made her way through the crowd and out of the barn, gulping the cool night air. The stars were brilliant overhead, the moon casting silver light across the ranch yard. Gabriella wrapped her arms around herself, unsettled by how easily Vincent Rawlins had seen through her carefully constructed facade. Miss Townsend? She turned to find him standing a few feet away, his expression contrite. I've upset you. I'm sorry. Gabriella shook her head. You were just being observant. It's not your fault that I... She stopped, unwilling to reveal more. Vincent moved closer but maintained a respectful distance. Whatever brought you to Sweetwater, whatever you're trying to leave behind, it doesn't define you. Not unless you let it. The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. You don't know anything about me. I'd like to. He said it simply, without artifice. If you'd let me. Before she could respond, Eleanor appeared, looking flushed and happy from dancing. There you are. I was beginning to think you'd disappeared. It's getting late, dear. Should we start back? Gabriella nodded, relieved and disappointed at the interruption. Yes, I should return to the boarding house. Vincent walked them to their buggy, helping each lady up with easy courtesy. As Gabriella settled on the seat, he looked up at her. The aspen leaves are turning in the high meadow, best view in the county this time of year. I ride up there most Sundays after church. If you'd care to see it, I could bring an extra horse. It was a simple invitation, yet laden with meaning. Gabriella hesitated, torn between caution and an unexpected desire to say yes. Perhaps, was all she committed to. But the smile it brought to his face stayed with her all the way back to town. The following morning, Gabriella was distracted as she prepared breakfast for her boarders. Her thoughts kept returning to the dance, to Vincent Rawlins and his invitation. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to consider any man's company, let alone enjoy it. You seem pensive this morning, Miss Townsend, Mr. Rawlins commented as she refilled his coffee cup. Did you enjoy the harvest dance? It was lovely. Your family knows how to entertain. The elderly man nodded approvingly. Margaret has always been a fine hostess. And I noticed my nephew paid you particular attention. Gabriella busied herself straightening the tablecloth. Mr. Rawlins was simply being a good host. Vincent doesn't dance with just anyone, my dear. In fact, I can't recall the last time I saw him dance at all. He sipped his coffee with a knowing look. He's a good man, you know. Hot-headed in his youth, but he's grown into his responsibilities admirably. I'm sure he has, Gabriella replied neutrally. More biscuits, Mr. Rawlins? The older man accepted with a chuckle, clearly seeing through her attempt to change the subject. After breakfast, Gabriella was sweeping the front porch when she noticed a rider approaching. Her heart quickened as she recognized Vincent Rawlins on a tall chestnut horse, leading a gentle-looking bay mare. Good morning, Miss Townsend, he called as he reached the boarding house. Beautiful day for a ride. Gabriella leaned on her broom. I don't recall accepting your invitation, Mr. Rawlins. You didn't decline it either. He dismounted, tying both horses to the hitching post. I thought I'd take a chance. She regarded him steadily, weighing caution against the unexpected longing for something beyond her daily routine. I have responsibilities here. Lunch to prepare, rooms to clean. Uncle Hank tells me you have help on Sundays, a Mrs. Peterson who comes in to cook. His eyes held a challenge. Unless that's not the real reason you're hesitating. Gabriella bristled at his perception. You're very persistent, Mr. Rawlins. Only about things that matter. He stepped closer, his expression turning serious. One afternoon, Miss Townsend. Fresh air, beautiful scenery, and I promise to have you back before supper. Perhaps it was the earnestness in his eyes, or maybe just the bright autumn day that made confinement seem suddenly unbearable. Let me change my dress and leave instructions for Mrs. Peterson. His smile was worth the risk, she decided as she hurried inside. 20 minutes later, dressed in her sturdiest skirt and boots, Gabriella allowed Vincent to help her mount the bay mare. The horse was calm and responsive, clearly chosen with care for a rider of uncertain experience. Daisy's gentle as they come, Vincent assured her as they set off at a walk. She'll follow Rusty without much guidance, but if you want to take the reins, she'll mind you well enough. They rode through town and out onto the open range, the land rising gradually toward distant foothills. Gabriella relaxed as they went, finding a comfortable rhythm with the horse. It had been years since she'd ridden, but the old skills returned quickly. Vincent proved to be a companionable guide, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area. He asked questions too, but respectfully backed off when she deflected those that probed too deeply into her past. As they climbed higher into the foothills, the landscape changed. Pine forests gave way to groves of aspen, their leaves a brilliant gold against the blue sky. The air grew cooler and carried the scent of fallen leaves and earth. Almost there, Vincent said, as they followed a narrow trail that wound up a gentle slope. Just over this rise. They crested the hill, and Gabriella caught her breath. Before them lay a small mountain meadow ringed by aspens in full autumn glory. The golden leaves shimmered in the sunlight, and beyond them, the mountains rose in purple majesty against the horizon. It's beautiful, she said softly. Vincent nodded, watching her face rather than the view. Worth the ride? Absolutely. For the first time in months, maybe years, Gabriella felt a genuine sense of peace. Thank you for bringing me here. They dismounted in the meadow, and Vincent spread a blanket he'd brought in his saddlebag. From the same bag, he produced a small bundle of food bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a flask of cold coffee. I thought you might be hungry after the ride, he explained as they sat. The simple meal tasted wonderful in the mountain air. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, watching the aspen leaves flutter in the breeze. Finally, Vincent spoke. My father used to bring me here when I was a boy. Said a man needs beautiful places to remember when life gets hard. He sounds wise. He was. Vincent's eyes held a distant look. Hot-tempered and stubborn, too. But wise in his way. He built the Bar R from nothing, taught me everything I know about ranching and horses. You must miss him. Every day. He looked at her directly. That's one of the hard things about lost people expect you to get over it, move on. But you don't. Not really. You just learn to live with the empty space. His understanding struck a chord in Gabriella. Yes, she said quietly. That's exactly it. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, a shared understanding that needed no words. Vincent reached over slowly and took her hand, his touch gentle and warm. Whoever hurt you, Gabriella, they were a fool. The use of her first name should have bothered her, but somehow it felt right. Still, his perception made her vulnerable, and vulnerability was dangerous. She withdrew her hand. You assume much, Mr. Rawlins. Vince, he corrected. And I observe, not assume. I've seen how you flinch when men get too close, how you maintain that wall of perfect politeness. Someone taught you to expect the worst from people, from men especially. Gabriella stood, needing distance. We should start back. It'll be getting dark soon. Vincent didn't push. He packed up their simple picnic and helped her mount without further personal questions. But as they rode back down the trail, Gabriella felt the wall she'd built around her heart develop its first tiny crack. The ride back was quieter, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached Sweetwater, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, casting long shadows across the plain. "Thank you for today," Gabriella said as they reached the boarding house. "It was more than I expected." Vincent helped her down from the horse, his hands lingering at her waist for just a moment. "I'm glad you came." His eyes held hers. "Maybe next Sunday we could ride to the waterfall on the North Ridge." She should say no. One afternoon was already more than she'd allowed herself in years, but the thought of returning to her solitary routine seemed suddenly bleak. Perhaps. It was becoming her standard answer to him, non-committal, yet not a refusal. He smiled as if she'd given a firm yes. "I'll look forward to it." Over the next few weeks, a pattern emerged. Vincent would appear after church on Sundays, 2 horses ready, and Gabriella would join him for rides that took them to various beautiful spots around Sweetwater, the waterfall he'd mentioned, a hidden valley carpeted with late wildflowers, a high ridge with views that stretched for miles. During these rides, they talked about books they'd read, about the changing seasons, about the characters in Sweetwater. Vincent shared stories of growing up on the ranch, of cattle drives and the challenges of managing such a large operation. Gabriella spoke of her aunt, of running the boarding house, of the small pleasures she found in baking and gardening. What she didn't speak of was Charles, or the devastation he'd left in his wake. But Vincent seemed to understand there were boundaries he shouldn't cross, at least, not yet. He never pushed when she changed the subject or fell silent at certain questions. As October gave way to November, their Sunday rides became the highlight of Gabriella's week. She found herself smiling more, engaging more with her boarders and neighbors. Eleanor noticed the change. "That cowboy of yours has been good for you," she commented one afternoon as they quilted together by the fire. "He's not my cowboy," Gabriella protested. "We're friends, nothing more." Eleanor's knowing smile was infuriating. "If you say so, dear. But I haven't seen you this alive since you came to Sweetwater." Gabriella couldn't deny the truth of it. Something had awakened in her during these weeks, a capacity for joy she'd thought long extinguished. Still, she maintained her guard. Friendship was one thing. Allowing herself to feel more was a risk she wasn't sure she could take. The first snow came in mid-November, a light dusting that melted by noon but signaled the approach of winter. That Sunday, Vincent arrived not with horses but with a sleigh pulled by 2 matched grays. "Thought we'd try something different today," he said, helping her up onto the seat and tucking a fur robe around her legs. The high meadows beautiful with fresh snow. The sleigh ride was magical, silent except for the jingle of harness bells and the soft shush of runners on snow. The world seemed transformed, pristine and new under its white blanket. In the high meadow, Vincent produced a thermos of hot chocolate and they sat in the sleigh, watching their breath cloud in the cold air. "Winter comes early in these mountains," he said. "We'll have to suspend our Sunday ride soon until spring." The thought brought an unexpected pang of loss. "I've enjoyed them very much." "As have I." He turned to look at her, his dark eyes serious. "But I'd like to keep seeing you, Gabriella, even when we can't ride." The directness of his statement startled her. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Rawlins?" "Vince," he corrected automatically. "And I'm suggesting that I call on you properly. Dinners, socials, sleigh rides when weather permits." He took a deep breath. "I care for you, Gabriella, more than I expected to. More than I've cared for anyone in a long while." Panic fluttered in her chest. This was exactly what she'd promised herself to avoid: emotional entanglement, vulnerability, the risk of further pain. I don't think that would be wise, because of whatever happened before you came here. When she didn't answer, he continued gently. I'm not asking for your whole heart, Gabriella. Just a chance to show you that not all men will hurt you. The crack in her wall widened dangerously. You don't understand. I can't. Can't what? Trust again? Feel again? His voice was soft but persistent. Whatever happened, however badly you were hurt, do you really want to let that define the rest of your life? Tears pricked at her eyes, unwelcome and betraying. It's not that simple. Nothing worth having ever is. He reached for her hand, holding it between both of his. I'm not asking for an answer today. Just think about it. The return journey was quiet, each lost in thought. When they reached the boarding house, Vincent helped her down from the sleigh with his usual courtesy. Before she could turn away, he caught her hand again. I'll respect whatever decision you make, Gabriella. But know this, I believe you're worth waiting for. The words followed her inside, echoing in her mind as she went through the motions of her evening routine. Worth waiting for. When had anyone ever thought that about her? Charles had rushed her into marriage, impatient for the small inheritance that came with her, treating her feelings as an inconvenience to be managed rather than treasured. That night, lying awake in her narrow bed, Gabriella finally allowed herself to examine the feelings she'd been suppressing. She cared for Vincent, his kindness, his patience, his quiet strength. In his company, she felt safe in a way she hadn't in years. But was that enough to risk her heart again? The answer didn't come easily, but by morning, she had reached a decision of sorts. She would allow Vincent to call on her, to explore whatever was growing between them, but slowly, cautiously, with her eyes wide open. Winter descended on Sweetwater with a vengeance the following week. Heavy snow blanketed the town, and temperatures plummeted. The boarding house filled to capacity as travelers were stranded by impassable roads, keeping Gabriella busier than ever. Vincent called 3 days after their sleigh ride, stamping snow from his boots in the front hall and presenting her with a small package. A token, he said, as she unwrapped the leather-bound volume of poetry. I remembered you mentioned liking Wordsworth. The thoughtfulness of the gift touched her. Thank you. It's perfect. He stayed for tea in the parlor, mindful of propriety with other boarders present. Before leaving, he asked, would you join me for dinner at the hotel restaurant tomorrow evening? They do a fine roast beef on Fridays. Gabriella hesitated only briefly. Yes, I'd like that. His smile warmed her more than the fire blazing in the grate. The dinner was pleasant. The hotel restaurant, a respectable establishment where several other couples and families were also dining. Vincent was attentive but not overwhelming, sharing stories that made her laugh and listening intently when she spoke. They discovered shared opinions on books and music, and divergent but complementary views on politics and the future of the territory. As he walked her back to the boarding house through the gently falling snow, Vincent offered his arm, and Gabriella took it without hesitation. At her door, he didn't try to kiss her, just lifted her hand briefly to his lips in a gesture that was both respectful and intimate. May I call on you Sunday after church? He asked. Yes, she replied, finding the answer came more easily now. This became their new pattern as winter deepened: dinners at the hotel, occasional sleigh rides when the weather permitted. Sunday afternoons in the boarding house parlor with the door properly open. Christmas approached, and Sweetwater transformed with decorations and preparations for the holiday. One evening in mid-December, Vincent arrived for their usual dinner date looking troubled. I have to go to Cheyenne, he said as they settled at their table. Business with the railroad that can't wait. I'll be gone at least 2 weeks, maybe longer. Disappointment washed over Gabriella. stronger than she would have expected. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow morning. I wanted tonight with you before I go." He reached across the table to take her hand. "I'll miss you, Gabriella." The simple declaration sent warmth spreading through her. "I'll miss you too." After dinner, they walked slowly back to the boarding house, reluctant for the evening to end. At her door, Vincent turned to her, his expression serious in the lamplight. "Gabriella, before I go, there's something I need to know." He took a deep breath. "When I return, do I have reason to hope? For us?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning. Gabriella looked up at him. This man who had so carefully, patiently worked his way past her defenses over these past months. "Yes," she said softly. "You do." The joy that lit his face was worth the risk of those words. Vincent stepped closer, his hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. "May I kiss you goodnight?" Heart pounding, Gabriella nodded. His lips met hers in a kiss that was tender, almost reverent, a promise rather than a demand. When he pulled back, his eyes held hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "I'll be back as soon as I can," he said, his voice husky. After he left, Gabriella stood in the hallway, fingers touching her lips, a mixture of elation and terror coursing through her. She had just taken a step she'd sworn never to take again, opened herself to the possibility of love, with all its attendant risks. The days of Vincent's absence stretched longer than Gabriella had anticipated. Winter storms delayed travel, and his business in Cheyenne proved more complicated than expected. His letters arrived sporadically, full of frustration at the delay and warm expressions of how much he missed her. Gabriella threw herself into Christmas preparations, decorating the boarding house and baking traditional treats. On Christmas Eve, she hosted a small gathering for her boarders and a few neighbors, including Eleanor. The parlor was festive with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, and the mood merry with mulled cider and carol singing. As the evening wound down and guests departed, Eleanor lingered to help clean up. "You've done a wonderful job with this place," she said, surveying the cozy parlor. "Martha would be proud." "Thank you. It feels like home now." Eleanor studied her thoughtfully. "You're different from when you first arrived. There's a light in you that wasn't there before." Gabriella smiled, acknowledging the truth of it. "I suppose I am different. Vincent Rawlins is a lucky man." At Gabriella's startled look, Eleanor laughed. "Oh, my dear, everyone in town can see what's growing between you two. It's written all over both your faces whenever you're together." The observation made Gabriella both self-conscious and quietly pleased. "We're taking things slowly." "As you should. But don't let fear keep you from happiness, Gabriella. Not everyone is like whoever hurt you before." The gentle advice stayed with Gabriella as she prepared for bed that night. Was she still letting fear dictate her choices? Had she truly given Vincent a fair chance, or was she holding back essential parts of herself? She took out his most recent letter, rereading his words by lamplight. "When I return, I hope we can talk about the future, our future, if you're willing. These weeks away have only confirmed what I already knew, that you've become essential to my happiness." A future with Vincent. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. To truly move forward, she would need to tell him about Charles, about the pain and betrayal that had shaped her these past years. The prospect made her stomach clench with anxiety. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, the sun glittering on fresh snow. Gabriella rose early to prepare a special breakfast for her boarders, trying to keep her thoughts from dwelling on Vincent's absence. She had just set the dining table when a knock came at the front door. Opening it, she found a young boy from the telegraph office, his nose red with cold. "Message for Miss Townsend," he said, holding out an envelope. Gabriella tipped him and closed the door, her hand suddenly unsteady as she opened the telegram. "Arriving Christmas afternoon. Stop, weather cleared. Stop, cannot wait to see you. Stop, Vincent. Joy bubbled up inside her, unexpected and welcome. She read the message 3 times before tucking it into her pocket, a smile playing at her lips as she returned to her breakfast preparations. The hours seemed to crawl by. After the Christmas meal with her boarders, Gabriella found herself checking the clock every few minutes, standing at windows to peer down the street. When a knock finally came at 4 o'clock, she had to restrain herself from rushing to the door. Vincent stood on the porch, his coat dusted with snow, his face weary from travel, but brightening the moment he saw her. "Merry Christmas, Gabriella." "Merry Christmas." She stepped back to let him in. "I didn't expect you until evening." "I caught an earlier stage." He removed his hat and coat, hanging them by the door. "I couldn't bear another hour away." The simple honesty in his voice touched her deeply. They moved to the parlor where the Christmas tree glowed with candles and the fire crackled invitingly. Vincent sank onto the sofa with a sigh of contentment. "This is exactly what I've been dreaming of for 2 weeks, you. This room. That fire." Gabriella sat beside him, close but not touching. "Was your business successful?" "Eventually. The railroad is extending a spur line closer to Sweetwater. It'll make shipping cattle much easier come spring." His eyes hadn't left her face. "But I didn't come here to talk about cattle or railroads." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in silver paper. "I found this in Cheyenne and thought of you immediately." Gabriella unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small silver locket, simple but elegant, with a delicate filigree pattern on its surface. "It's beautiful." "Open it," Vincent urged. Inside was a tiny pressed flower, an aspen leaf preserved at the height of its golden glory. "From our meadow," she whispered, recognizing it immediately. "I collected it that day in the sleigh. The jeweler in Cheyenne helped me preserve it properly." Vincent took the locket from her hands and gently fastened it around her neck. "To remind you of that day, and all our days since." The thoughtfulness of the gift nearly undid her. "I have something for you too," she said, rising to retrieve a package from beneath the tree. "Though it seems inadequate now." Vincent unwrapped the hand-knitted scarf she'd worked on during the long evenings of his absence. "You made this?" "Yes. The nights were long without our dinners to look forward to." He wrapped the scarf around his neck, his expression tender. "It's perfect. Thank you." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Finally, Vincent spoke, his voice gentle but serious. "Gabriella, these weeks away gave me time to think about what I want, what I hope for." He turned to face her fully. "I care for you deeply, more than I thought possible. And I hope that you feel something for me too." Her heart hammered in her chest. "I do." "Then I need to ask what's holding you back. Because even when you're with me, there's a part of you that remains distant, guarded." The moment had come. Sooner than she'd expected, but perhaps exactly when it needed to. Gabriella took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Before I came to Sweetwater, I was married." The words felt strange on her tongue after so long keeping them inside. "His name was Charles Townsend. We wed when I was 20, against my father's wishes." Vincent didn't interrupt, just listened intently as she continued. "Charles was charming, persuasive. He promised me the world." Bitterness crept into her voice. What he delivered was 3 years of lies, gambling debts, and ultimately betrayal. He left me for another woman, but not before nearly destroying me financially and emotionally. She stared into the fire, unable to meet Vincent's eyes. "After he left, men he owed money to burned my home. I came to Sweetwater with nothing but my aunt's deed and a determination never to be so foolish again." When she finally looked up, the compassion in Vincent's eyes nearly broke her. You weren't foolish, Gabriella. You were betrayed by someone who should have cherished you. I should have seen it coming. There were signs. We see what we want to see in those we love. He reached for her hand, holding it gently. Is he why you kept me at a distance? Why you hesitated to trust me? Yes. The admission felt like releasing a heavy burden. I swore I'd never give anyone the power to hurt me that way again. Vincent nodded slowly. I understand. And I won't pretend it doesn't matter. It matters because it shaped you, because it caused you pain. He lifted her hand to his lips. But it doesn't change how I feel about you. If anything, knowing what you've overcome only makes me admire you more. Tears welled in Gabriella's eyes. I'm afraid, Vincent. Afraid to trust, to hope, to love again. I know. His voice was tender. And I won't rush you. We'll take whatever time you need. He smiled slightly. I told you once that you're worth waiting for. I meant it. In that moment, looking into his steady eyes, Gabriella felt the last of her walls begin to crumble. This man was nothing like Charles, not in his patience, his honesty, or the way he looked at her as if she were something precious rather than a possession to be used. I don't want to be afraid anymore, she whispered. I want to trust again, to feel again. Vincent's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and kissed her. Unlike their first kiss, this one held promise and passion in equal measure, a beginning rather than a farewell. When they parted, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. Merry Christmas, Gabriella. Merry Christmas, Vince, she replied, using his familiar name for the first time. As winter gave way to spring, Gabriella and Vincent's courtship deepened. He called on her regularly, taking her to dinners, church socials, and as the weather improved, resuming their Sunday rides to favorite spots around Sweetwater. With each passing week, Gabriella found herself opening more fully to the possibility of a future with him. The change didn't go unnoticed. Eleanor commented on her newfound happiness, and even her boarders remarked on her brighter spirits. The boarding house itself seemed to reflect her inner transformation, with fresh curtains, new plantings in the garden, and more laughter in its rooms. One evening in early May, as they walked back from dinner, Vincent suggested a detour to the town's small park. The night was mild, stars brilliant overhead, and the scent of flowering trees filled the air. I have news, he said, as they settled on a bench. The railroad spur to Sweetwater is definitely happening. Construction begins next month. That's wonderful for the town, Gabriella replied. And for your ranch. Yes, but it means I'll be busier than ever this summer. He took her hand, his expression earnest. Which is partly why I wanted to speak with you tonight. Something in his tone made her pulse quicken. Oh? Gabriella, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've become essential to me, your smile, your strength, the way you see the world. He slid from the bench to one knee before her, still holding her hand. I love you, and I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me? Though she'd begun to anticipate this moment, the reality of it still took her breath away. Vincent knelt before her, his eyes filled with love and hope, offering her a future she'd once thought forever closed to her. For a heartbeat, old fears whispered warnings, but then she looked at Vincent steady, patient, kind Vincent who had never pushed or demanded but had simply loved her through her healing and knew her answer. Yes, she said, her voice clear and certain. Yes, I'll marry you. Joy blazed across his face as he pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring with a single perfect diamond flanked by smaller sapphires. It was my grandmother's, he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. My mother gave it to me before Christmas, hoping I'd find someone worthy of it. The ring fit as if made for her. Vincent rose and pulled her to her feet, kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally parted, he kept his arms around her. "When?" he asked simply. Gabriella considered. A year ago, she would have insisted on a long engagement. Time to be certain. But now, with her heart finally whole and open, waiting seemed unnecessary. "June," she suggested. "When the wildflowers are at their peak." Vincent's smile was radiant. "June it is." The news of their engagement spread quickly through Sweetwater. Eleanor was delighted, claiming she'd known from the start they were perfect for each other. Vincent's mother immediately began planning a celebration at the ranch, and Gabriella found herself welcomed warmly into the Rawlins family. The weeks leading to the wedding passed in a whirl of preparations. Gabriella ordered a wedding dress from Denver, a simple but elegant creation of ivory silk, with lace at the collar and cuffs. She and Vincent made plans for after the wedding she would move to the ranch, but they decided to keep the boarding house operating with a manager, providing Gabriella with independent income and preserving her aunt's legacy. As the June wedding date approached, Gabriella experienced moments of doubt not about Vincent, but about her own capacity to be the wife he deserved. One evening, sitting on the boarding house porch after the boarders had retired, she confessed these fears. "What if I'm too damaged by the past? What if I can't be what you need?" Vincent took her hand, his expression serious. "Gabriella, I don't want you to be anything other than exactly who you are. Your past, your pain, your healing, they're all part of the woman I love. But marriage, it requires such trust, such vulnerability." "Yes, it does. And we'll build that together, day by day." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not Charles. I won't betray your trust or take you for granted. But I'm also not perfect. We'll make mistakes, have disagreements. What matters is that we face them together, with honesty and respect." His words settled her fears, not banishing them completely, but putting them in perspective. This was Vincent, the man who had patiently waited while she learned to trust again, who had never pushed beyond what she was ready to give. If anyone deserved her complete trust, it was him. Their wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the kind of Wyoming June day that seemed created especially for celebrations. The ceremony was held in the meadow where Vincent had first taken her, now carpeted with wildflowers. Friends and neighbors from Sweetwater gathered to witness their vows, along with ranchers from throughout the county and Vincent's extended family. Gabriella wore her ivory silk dress with the silver locket Vincent had given her at Christmas. As she walked toward him on a path strewn with flower petals, her eyes locked with his, she felt a certainty she had never expected to feel again, the certainty of having found her true home. The minister's words washed over her, traditional and timeless, but it was Vincent's vows that brought tears to her eyes. "Gabriella, I promise to cherish you all the days of my life, to honor your strength, respect your independence, and support your dreams, to be patient when you need patience, strong when you need strength, and always, always truthful. I promise to love you as you deserve to be loved completely and faithfully until my last breath." When it came her turn, Gabriella's voice was steady despite her tears. "Vincent, I promise to trust you with my heart, my hopes, and my fears. To stand beside you in joy and in sorrow, in plenty and in want. To build with you a home filled with love, honesty, and respect. I promise to remember each day what a gift it is to love and be loved, and to never take for granted the life we create together." The kiss that sealed their vows was both tender and passionate, a promise of the life awaiting them. As they turned to face their friends and family, Gabriella felt a lightness she hadn't known in years, the lightness of a heart finally free from the past, open to all the possibilities of the future. The celebration afterward at the Bar R Ranch lasted well into the night, with feasting, dancing, and toasts to the bride and groom. As evening fell, Lanterns were lit in the trees, casting a magical glow over the gathering. Vincent led Gabriella in a waltz under the stars, holding her close as they moved to the music. "Happy, Mrs. Rawlins?" he asked, his eyes shining in the lamplight. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. Later, as they slipped away from the celebration to begin their married life, Gabriella took one last look at the gathering of friends and family. How far she had come from that broken woman who arrived in Sweetwater, determined never to risk her heart again. Vincent had taught her the most important lesson of all, that while love carried risks, a life without it was no life at all. In opening herself to him, she had found not just love, but healing, not just companionship, but completion. As they rode toward their future in the gathering twilight, Gabriella's heart was full with the knowledge that she had found what she once believed lost forever, the courage to love again, and a man worthy of that love. In the years that followed, the Bar R Ranch prospered under Vincent's management, expanding its operations as the railroad brought new opportunities to Sweetwater. Gabriella maintained oversight of the boarding house through a capable manager, occasionally stepping in when needed, but primarily focusing on her life at the ranch. Their first child, a daughter they named Margaret after Vincent's mother, arrived a year after their wedding. She was followed 2 years later by a son, James, named for Gabriella's father. The children brought new dimensions of joy to their lives, and Gabriella found that motherhood suited her, the fierce protectiveness she felt for her children, channeling her strength in new ways. The Willow Creek boarding house remained a Sweetwater institution, eventually expanding to include a small restaurant that became known throughout the county for its excellent meals. Though Gabriella no longer lived there, she took pride in preserving her aunt's legacy while putting her own stamp on the business. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Vincent surprised Gabriella with a trip back to the Aspen Meadow where their love had first truly begun to grow. They rode up on horseback, leaving the children in the capable care of Vincent's mother, and spent a perfect summer day reminiscing about their courtship and planning for their future. As they prepared to ride back to the ranch, Vincent took Gabriella's hand, his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever regret it? Taking a chance on me, on us, after everything you'd been through?" Gabriella looked at her husband, this man who had held her with patience while she learned to trust again, who had never once given her reason to doubt his love or his integrity. "Never," she said firmly. "You taught me that the heart can heal, that love worth having is worth risking everything for." Vincent smiled, the same smile that still made her heart quicken after all these years. "I'm the fortunate one. You could have chosen the safer path, kept those walls up forever, but you were brave enough to try again." "Not brave," Gabriella corrected, reaching up to touch his face. "Just wise enough to recognize a good man when I found him. And patient enough to let him show me what real love looks like." As they rode home in the golden afternoon light, Gabriella reflected on the journey that had brought her here from the ashes of betrayal to the fullness of the life she now lived. There had been moments of doubt and fear along the way, old scars that occasionally still ached. But Vincent had been true to his word, loving her with a steadiness that had allowed her wounded heart to heal and flourish. She had stopped believing in love once, convinced that the pain of betrayal was all that awaited those foolish enough to trust. But a patient cowboy had shown her otherwise, holding her with gentleness until she found the courage to believe again. And in that belief, she had found not just love, but her truest self, strong, resilient, and finally, completely whole.